Hi guys, another great episode coming up as we continue our foray into the United States. This episode we spoke to Bernie Borges. Bernie's known as the Fulfillment Architect. He's also the host of the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast, which is a great listen. But yeah, we had quite a wide-ranging chat talking about how fulfillment is so important in midlife. So what were the highlights for you, Volker?
I mean, he had five key principles, really, right, for fulfillment, or 5 areas, right? I don't want to take away too much, but it's health, fitness, career, relationship, and legacy. And we talked about that and what limit life really means. And I loved it. I mean, I challenged him on a couple of points, hopefully rightly, but that's what it's all about. I think there's a lot in there. I really love his approach. So very excited to release this now.
Brilliant. Well, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Man Up, Man Down podcast, presented by Volker Beluda and David Pawsey. We discuss the pressures and challenges faced by men approaching middle age that we're often too embarrassed to speak about with our friends. You can find us online at www.manupdown.com. Enjoy the show and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
Brilliant. So welcome to another episode of Man Up, Man Down. So today we're going stateside again. So I'm very excited to have, we are very excited to have Bernie Borges on the podcast. So as the creator of the Fulfillment Centric Leadership Framework and host of the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast, Bernie brings over 30 years of experience in marketing, strategy, leadership, and communication. His inspiring keynotes and workshops help leaders create thriving, fulfilled teams by aligning personal purpose with organizational success. So whether guiding midlife professionals through personal reinvention or helping organizations elevate workplace culture, Bernie delivers actionable strategies that transform engagement, fulfillment, and productivity. So there's a lot in there, and Bernie, I reached out to you because of the whole Midlife podcast. So first of all, welcome to our Midlife podcast.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you, David, for having me. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy being on Midlife Podcasts. And of course, what you guys are doing on the Man Up, Man Down podcast for Midlife Men is fantastic. I've been tuning in and you're doing great work, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us a little bit more about you. You're sitting in Florida. We already talked about the weather before we went live, as we Brits do.
Yep. So as you said, stateside, I'm based in Florida. I've been in Florida for 30 years. Didn't grow up here, but I've been here 30 years. And married 37 years, 2 adult children, 4 grandchildren. So very much in that midlife category, right? You mentioned in the intro that most of my career background is in marketing, specifically business to business, B2B marketing, a lot in professional services and technology. And then about 12 years ago, I got into podcasting. So for those that are watching on video, because I know people can listen on audio and then you can also watch on video, this microphone that I have here, I often joke that it's an appendage because I've been using it for many years now. And I've had 3 podcast shows, and my current podcast, only one at a time, by the way, but my current podcast show is the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast. As we're recording this, I've published 232 episodes. I publish every Monday, weekly. I have not missed a single week since I launched in February 2022. And I decided to do a podcast about midlife, which is, by the way, not for men only. It's for everybody. But I wanted to focus in on midlife just because of the journey that I've been on and, my ups and downs, my struggles, my victories, all of that. And I knew that I was not alone. And when I did research on the midlife podcasts that are out there, the vast majority of them, and I don't know if you guys were around when I did my research because it was a little more than 3 years ago. I launched little more than 3 years ago, February 2022. So I was doing my research in kind of late 2021. I don't know if you guys were around, but almost all the podcasts that I found on midlife were hosted by women, specifically talking to women about topics for women, right? You guys are nodding your head like, that's why you launched this podcast for guys, right?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. When we start doing some research, there's a lot of midlife podcasts out there for women, and it's very very interesting actually because it's did some research last night, so very 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 timely on some top coaches and leadership people in the UK, and 90% are women as well. So there's not a lot of men leadership coaches out there, and men. That's one of the reasons why we don't do podcast. Men don't talk, right? We don't talk about our midlife, about erectile dysfunction or about weight gain and all these things. And that was the purpose why we decided, let's talk about it. Let's start the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was doing my research, I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about midlife? I've got to pick a theme. And so I just continued my research and I came across a study called the happiness U curve. Have you heard of that study, the happiness U curve? You have,
Yeah.
David?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the one where we get miserable in our 40s essentially and then start
Yeah,
getting happier afterwards?
exactly. Yeah, it was a global study. Came out, I think, about 5 years ago, give or take. And exactly what it shows is that it's called the happiness U curve, U meaning the letter U, because, the letter U starts at the top and then it goes down at the bottom and then there's this trough and then it comes back up. That's what the letter U is shaped like. And basically what it says is that we, just humans, and this is not a man or woman thing, we are happiest at age 18. That's the peak of our happiness in our youth. But then we slowly get unhappier and at least, less and less happy. And then we bottom out. We're least happy, according to the report, at age 47.2, which is kind of ridiculous because how can you pinpoint it? But nonetheless, that's what the research says, right? So we're least happy at age 47.2. But then we start climbing up the other side and we start getting happier and happier and happier all the way into our 70s. And I'm in my 60s. And so I would say that I certainly kind of fit that stereotype. But here's the thing, guys. I wasn't satisfied with that because I think happiness is overrated. How's that for a bold statement? Let me explain what I mean by that. Because again, I was just doing my research on this. And the reason I say that I think happiness is overrated is because happiness is a fleeting emotion. For me, because of our time difference, I'm in the States, you guys are in the UK. It's not quite noon here at the time that we're recording this. I can be happy this morning. Later today, I can be unhappy for some other reason. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. That's what led me to exploring fulfillment. What I discovered about fulfillment is a lot of things. How much do we have, like 3 hours? No, I'm kidding. But I discovered a lot about fulfillment. First and foremost, I discovered that it is distinct. It is not exactly the same as happiness. And a lot of people often sort of mistake that and they use the two words interchangeably. Fulfillment is an emotion, just like happiness is an emotion, but it's deeper. And it's associated usually, in most cases, with some kind of an achievement. David, you were kind of joking earlier about the editing, that, the person on your team that does the editing, that they're going to be, more fulfilled. So let's use that as a simple example of someone completes an editing project on anything. Let's call it a podcast. And at the end of it, they're really pleased with the final production, right? That's an achievement. Achievement is what fuels fulfillment, whether it's a little tiny achievement or a big achievement. It fuels fulfillment. And that brings me to the second attribute of fulfillment. And that is, most of the time, it's immutable. In other words, depending on your familiarity with the word immutable, nothing can take it away. It's permanent, right? So think about like your education. When you completed an educational milestone, who's going to take that away from you? What that fulfillment you got from that achievement? There's nothing that can take that away. Now that's an example of a pretty big achievement that gives you some pretty big fulfillment. But there's so many little ones along the way that we can experience and acknowledge throughout our life. So anyway, that I just wanted to give you the insight on how I arrived at the fulfillment theme for the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. Let me pause there.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Because fulfillment would go deeper. So which smaller ones are you talking about? You think there are lots of small ones that give us not only happiness. I don't know, an ice cream in the sun, does it give us happiness or fulfillment? So you would argue that would give us happiness, short-term happiness, because it's not a very profound change. It's not as deep.
Yeah. So let me unpack it a little bit more
Yeah.
for you guys. It wasn't immediately upon my launch of the podcast, but as I was developing the podcast and, rolling out the content, I arrived at a point where I defined what I call it my platform. And that is that we all seek fulfillment across what I call the 5 key life pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So, in other words, instead of just trying to like find fulfillment, or instead of beating yourself up and saying, I'm just not fulfilled, that to me is like the old proverbial boiling the ocean. Okay. So instead of using that big blanket statement, I'm not fulfilled, what I say is look at your life through these 5 pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So let's unpack each one of them. Health is both physical and mental. That's humongous, right? And for all of us, there might be things that we can't control in our health. Maybe it's hereditary or an accident, whatever case. Sometimes there are things we can't control within our health, but there are things that we have some control over, both physical and mental. Fitness, particularly in midlife, is not about competing in the Olympics, right, guys? Fitness is about being functional. It's about just being able to just do life, not to mention plan for longevity, good bone strength, that kind of thing, and just being functional. Career kind of speaks for itself. However, in midlife, it's not uncommon for us to kind of hit some kind of a roadblock in our career where either something happens to us, so it's involuntary, or we wake up one day and just say, I am not fulfilled in this career. I've been doing it for 25 years or whatever, and it's just not doing it for me anymore. That is fairly common. I'm sure you guys, you hear that. Maybe you've experienced that yourself. Relationships, wow, that's multifaceted. There's the obvious: immediate loved ones, close circle of friends, work colleagues. Then there's maybe the not so obvious community, people that you're, exposed to in a community setting. Faith, I'm a person of faith. That's relationship, right? So relationship is multifaceted. And then legacy is about what impact do you want to have on fill in the blank? What impact do you want to have on a cause, a company, an industry, an individual, people in your family, whatever it may be? And it's not limited to one thing because it's always a personal choice. So the point I'm getting at is looking at fulfillment through the lens of those 5 pillars gives all of us an opportunity to really look at it and gain clarity on where we have fulfillment and where we lack fulfillment. So what do you guys think about that?
Oh, I mean, there's lots. Sorry, I'm just checking that I'm not on mute. But yeah, I mean, there's lots there that I can completely relate with. And I mean, I was listening to a few of your episodes, and I have to say I love the whole sort of, well, one of the ones I was listening to was sort of talking about the 3 P's of business, and one of those is profit. And you sort of discussing about how, well, from a personal point of view, your profit is fulfillment. But I mean, it's sort of with the, well, as I say, there's sort of quite a few. I'm just trying to get my thoughts straight. I mean, I was working. Well, spent a couple of days with the client this week who had their sort of company event meetup, and they're all based in lots of different places. And one of the things that was highlighted was that even though you can be logging on, and I think and this is quite typical for lots of businesses around the world now, is that it's not necessarily just entrepreneurs or, sole traders that are working on their own. You can still now be, since the pandemic, part of a large organization. And, and it's so you don't get that connection or the community that you would have had, just a few years ago. And I think, I don't know, the other thing that sort of resonates is a conversation I had with a friend a while ago was, you often sort of you see a report in the paper and it might be about a celebrity or a sports star. And it's always, they have a net worth of X million dollars or X million pounds. And I was like, it's mad that, in society, that's how we measure worth, and I'm like, why isn't there a metrics of, well, this is how much this person has contributed to society, forget the bank balance. This is how they're helping their community. So, and see, and, and it is something that I think about more and more, that, and again, like the pillars, it's almost like, well, I know for my own mental health, if I'm exercising regularly, I've got a sustainable amount of work. So, not so little that I'm worried about my finances, but not so much that I'm like, I haven't got time to think or do anything else. And yeah, and I think, it is all about how we balance those pillars and, just finding balance, I guess. So that, yeah, I don't know if that does follow in what you were saying, Bernie, but yeah, those are my thoughts around that.
Poker?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there, obviously. I mean, I like how you break it down into five pillars, right, of fulfillment. I personally always like legacy, right? And the first person that came to mind was Jerry Colonna, right? With his reboot. He was on the podcast last season, and it's a legacy. What do you stand for? What's your purpose, and why? For me, it encompasses this why you're doing things. And I think, and correct me, I think when we look at this in the perspective, particularly of midlife, right? A lot of people get to midlife and go like, what's my legacy? Why am I here? And what do I leave when I go? Right? Because we're getting to an age now where we start thinking, what is, do we have, are we at half point? Are we just over? Are we under? So I just turned 48. So am I halfway or not? Or do I still have a couple of years before I'm halfway? Is 50 the new 40? So that's my thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that I'm 67 and I've got a good head of hair. So some people sometimes say, wow, you don't look 67. And I can't take credit for the hair because that's all genetics. But certainly I'm very health conscious and fitness conscious and all that. So, but the point I'm getting at is from a mindset standpoint, I can tell you that at age 67, I'm all in on a new business that I just recently launched. I'm all in on this chapter of my life around this fulfillment centric leadership framework that you alluded to briefly in the introduction. So I've taken all this and I've put it into a leadership framework because my BHAG, my Big Hairy Audacious Goal, is to reach 3 billion people around the globe with this message of find fulfillment, seek and find fulfillment across the 5 key life pillars. And by the way, the reason that I chose 3 billion as the number is that it's estimated that there's 3 billion people on the planet that are over the age of 40. So I said, okay, well, how am I going to reach 3 billion people when I'm not famous or remarkably wealthy that would give me, the purchasing power to buy, reach?
You thought, oh,
And
come on the
so-
Man Up, Man Down podcast. They've got that
Exactly.
sort
So
of
here I
stats.
am. So now I'm going to reach 3 billion people. So I said, let me do this through leaders. So I'm taking this to leaders in organizations, could be businesses, could be nonprofits, and really teaching them to lead their people through this lens of fulfillment. So it really has a dual purpose for me in my legacy. One is to take it to leaders to impact a global statistic which is really, really bad, which is 77% of the global workforce is disengaged. 77%. Now, in the US, it's 70%. I don't know what it is in the UK, but globally, it's 77%. The US, 70% of the workforce is disengaged. And globally, the cost in lost productivity is $8.9 trillion. Let's just round that up to $9 trillion in lost productivity annually, globally, due to disengaged employees. And I believe the reason is because employees don't feel valued. And so it's a simple solution. If we empower leaders to create a workplace where employees feel both personally and professionally fulfilled, I want to repeat that, both personally and professionally fulfilled, then they feel better about going to work. They feel better. They feel closer to their immediate manager, which, by the way, I'm sure you know, uh, uh, the number one reason people leave a job is they don't like their manager or they don't get along with their manager or something associated with their manager. And so personal and professional fulfilled workplace employee population is simply going to produce better because they're going to give you their best. All the principles associated with that, every single one of them apply individually to our own life and self-leadership. So we began this conversation around the 5 pillars and what that means to each of us. And all I'm saying is that the only way that I can think of reaching 3 billion people, aside from coming on the Man Up, Man Down podcast, is to take the message out to leaders, because leaders lead people, right? So it's the bowling pin analogy, right? You guys do bowling in the UK, don't you?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we do that. But that's interesting. I mean, that's a scary stat, right? 77% disengaged.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I mean, at time of recording, we're on a bank holiday weekend, right? And the Friday before bank holiday weekend, there's nothing gets done, right? People just clock off, especially if it's nice weather, as we talked about, right? And I think we see that around the globe, and I wonder if that has gone up since COVID, right? Because people are sitting at home, when we're going off on a tangent here, right? But they're sitting at home, they're comfortable, they're getting paid every month, right? So if they get away with not doing anything, I think people just do. Maybe that's the wrong assumption, but as an entrepreneur, we can't do that, right? We're hustling and bustling every minute of the day. It's a different mindset.
But the vast majority of us, and when I say us, I know that this podcast is an awesome podcast for men, but this is not restricted to men. However, to your point earlier, a lot of times guys just don't think about this stuff. They're too busy just, trying to make money and trying to, live to some other people's standards. I know I'm stereotyping, but I also know that it's reality. But the point I'm getting at, this is not just for guys, but I'm privileged to have this opportunity with you, the two of you, to bring this message to an audience of men, to hopefully, inspire them to think about this. But the point is that if we do think about this, if we approach our life through this lens of fulfillment, then it's gonna fuel our need to have a purpose. We all need to have a purpose. And there's really one of two ways that people think about it. Either they bury it subconsciously and they're not thinking about it intentionally, or just the opposite. They're like thinking about it because they're wondering. For some reason, it's, age 45. So for some reason, for some people, it's age 50, whatever the number is that you wake up and go, what's my purpose? We all get there at some point. And all I'm saying is, look at it through the lens of fulfillment. Find your fulfillment, and your legacy is only 1/5 of it, right? It's one of the 5 pillars. Don't ignore the others, because health alone, if there's health issues in your life, that's huge. And it can be a big obstacle to so many other aspects of your life. So by looking at it holistically across the 5 pillars, it gives us what I call clarity. And that's another big one, guys, is once we have clarity, then we have insight into what we should be thinking about in terms of taking some action. Because, let me address the midlife crisis thing because it's part myth and part real. The myth part is a lot of people, and it's very prevalent in guys, I mean, ladies too, but really prevalent in guys, where they wake up one day and they go, I'm having a midlife crisis, and then they do something radical. Whatever that may be, we all know what the typical midlife crisis radical things are. I probably don't have to list them.
I
And
bought a sports car, hands up.
there you go. There you go. Love it. Love it. I want to
I've
see a
done it.
picture of it. But if you're doing it for the right reason, like if you have clarity on why you're doing it, great. If you don't have clarity on what action you're taking in your so-called midlife crisis, whether you call it that or not, then it might not be good. It might be a knee-jerk reaction that a week later, a month later, a year later, whenever, you might regret because you didn't do it for the right reason. So all I'm saying is when you look at your life through the lens of these 5 pillars, you can gain clarity on where you lack fulfillment. Then if you want to do something radical, at least you can say, here's why I'm doing this thing. And it brings me to another concept, guys, and that's conscious competent. A conscious competent is someone who can tell you why they're doing something and what the steps are. But again, they can tell you why. An unconscious competent just does it because they just do it intuitively and couldn't really articulate the specifics and probably couldn't give you the why.
Hello folks, it's Volker here. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. As you know, I coach executives, whether that is for leadership skills or sales leadership skills or working as a therapist too. There are few ways I can help you to get unstuck, improve your work-life balance or become a better version of yourself. So you will be more productive and have more time for your family. Whatever it is, you can join my client list of people from General Electric, Pepsi, DHL, Boots and many others. Book a free exploratory call via my website www.obnat.us. That's OBNAT.us. Now back to the show.
There's something in there, right? I mean, midlife crisis, right? All joking apart, right? Is it myth or not? But I think for me, midlife crisis is about it's a period in your life where you literally sit down and go, shit, what am I actually doing here, right? The kids at a certain age usually where you go, they're going to leave the nest at some point, right? It's just going to be me and my partner. You're thinking about death, right? Because you're getting closer to death. You might have health issues, you might not, but you might, I start seeing less. I have I need to have glasses, right? And all these things where you go like, I am getting older. I mean, just literally this morning, I increased the font size on my iPhone again, just so I can see those notifications, right? So there's a constant reminder as you get older. And we having this void, right? So working with middle-aged men in therapy and coaching, men have this void, right? Where they go like, I've done everything right. I ticked all the boxes. I got the career, but to your point, there's no fulfillment, right? And there might be some past issues to look at, and some future concerns as well, some worries. And what we do need is this why, right? Why are we doing that, right? Why are we still here? Why are we still needed, right? So you just mentioned you launched a new company, right? At 67. I assume you don't want to retire at 70. You probably haven't even thought about retirement because you're driven. These 3 million people, that's your life goal. And if that takes you to 80, 90 or 100, this is what you're after. But not everyone has that, right? A lot of people go like, oh shit, I ticked all the boxes, now what? Or I have some money in the bank, I buy a sports car, I buy, a younger partner, right? I buy whatever, I started tattooing, getting myself into tattoos. It's this gratification, this external gratification we're seeking, right? and it will never fulfill us because it's external, right? So we need to look inwards and find our purpose, our why, right?
So yes, and I always like to say yes, and I think one of the 5 pillars that a lot of us struggle with, and I'm referring to guys. I'm specifically referring to men, is the relationship pillar. And the reason that I think that that men struggle with the relationship pillar in midlife is because we've lived long enough to have all different types of relationships. In many cases in midlife, we have kids. We may have parents that are still alive, but getting older. And then we've got all kinds of relationships in the workplace, in the community, that sort of thing. But often, and I know I'm generalizing here, but often some relationships lack depth. And I think that that's a fairly common thing that I've seen among men where there's a lack of deep, meaningful relationships. I'm talking about the kind of relationship between and among men where there's a tightness, there's I'm going to use the word intimate, there's an intimacy, and like, I'm referring to just, an emotional connection, that kind of intimacy, right? A closeness, a tightness, an ability to be vulnerable with each other, an ability to be honest with each other, an ability to be accountable with each other. I think that often lacks with men in midlife. And that's why I've got the 5 pillars, so that instead of someone beating themselves up over boiling the ocean, you can at least look where in these 5 pillars. And if some of the things I'm saying for any guy who's listening resonates, like that's what you want to hone in on. Give yourself some credit in the other pillars, where you're doing well in health, where you're doing well in fitness or career, or maybe legacy. Give yourself some credit there. But if the relationship pillar is one where you struggle somewhat, then dive into that and do something about that.
Just something that thought that's come up from listening to your podcast and this discussion. A couple of decades ago, I was a financial journalist, and I remember that always, like, the conversation around retirement and pensions was that you have stages of retirement. So the first part will be, right, I'm not working anymore, I'm still relatively mobile, so I want to go out and do the things that I've always wanted to do. And then you sort of get to a certain point, and and obviously it will all be affected by the stages that your family, your children, grandchildren are at. But you've got different needs, different financial needs, effectively, and it's all about how you plan for those different stages. And and I'm sort of thinking, well, you've sort of talked about midlife crisis, and it's almost like, we've got focused on the fact that it's this, midpoint. And again, something we've talked about is, well, is it midlife crisis, or is it midlife clarity? Is it midlife opportunity? But, just sort of finding it interesting that, effectively we're sort of at the start of our midlife period. You're sort of a further stage ahead, so in some ways we're the young upstarts of this midlife movement. I mean, how have you sort of seen the different phases of your sort of midlife? And you know basically me and Volker are right at that point of you've mentioned, of 47.2. I mean, what advice would you have for us, or for your 47-year-old self?
Okay. Yeah. Love this question, David. Thank you. So I think we have 3 big overarching stages in life: youth, midlife, and end of life. And unless we die suddenly, like by accident or something, usually for a lot of people, end of life is a period of time. You know, I watched both of my parents, who are deceased now. I watched them go through about a 3-year decline in their health, and
Mm.
then they passed away. Now, they were in their 90s, so it was a natural thing. So youth, midlife, and end of life. However, midlife is the biggest piece, and I think we have 3 phases of midlife: early midlife, midlife, and late midlife. So let me give you some age brackets on that. I think early midlife is 30s and 40s. And if that surprises anybody, then okay, let it surprise you. I think we begin our midlife seasons in our 30s. I didn't know it when I was in my 30s, but now that I look back on it, because youth is really kind of that period of just like, I'm just growing up. I don't really know a whole lot. I'm just kind of trying to figure things out, get through school, and somewhere around age 30 is when like real adulthood kind of clicked in for me. So I look back, I didn't know it then, but I look back and in my 30s is the beginning of my midlife season. I use the word season intentionally, right? I think we have 3 seasons. So I think early midlife is 30s and 40s. I think midlife is 50s and 60s. So I'm at the tail end of that midlife, right? And then I think late midlife is 70s until we begin to experience a decline in our health. I have a friend, his name is Ken. He's 92 and he's going strong. He retired 5 years ago. So he was 87 when he retired. And he still is very, very active, both physically and intellectually. He's healthy, right? None of us knows when we're going to know. That's a God thing. We don't know that. My father-in-law is going to turn 96 in 3 months, and he's still going strong intellectually and physically, and he's active. So again, David, back to your question. I think we have 3 seasons of midlife: early, mid, and late. And I think looking at it that way is really healthy. I think a waste of time is trying to define your midpoint in life. Volker, you said, are you at the midpoint? Like that, don't even waste your time thinking about that because no one knows how long we have. And if anything, longevity is becoming a bigger part of our reality, between modern science and what we know about, good nutrition and exercise and all the things that can contribute to our longevity. So that's how I look at it, guys, is early, mid, and late, in terms of midlife seasons. And I just, tackle it with vigor. And, to your point, maybe not everyone who is my age, 67, wants to start a new business and, be all in on that and not think about retirement. That's an individual choice. I get that. But that's my choice. And I'm totally into that, and it fulfills me more than I can even begin to explain.
It's interesting what you're saying there because I don't know if I'm 100% agreeing with it. I need to think about it. But you have an early stage of adulthood, I would call it, which is probably 30 to 50. And I don't know if I would call that. It is probably midlife, right? I think midlife, officially starts just in your 30s, right? The midlife, 50 to 70, for me probably would be rather a later midlife, because I think a lot of people, but I don't know, I don't have the statistic to fill it out, to prove that, but would probably think 70 is kind of like when you start to decline, right?
You start to
And
what?
and if I say to decline, right? So you go towards, you retire, you're potentially less healthy, etc., etc. But that's a general assumption I'm making here. I don't have any stats. So I think I would think that if you ask most people, when you consider yourself old, I think most people would go 70. But I have no idea. And so that would be my challenge. But I love that you put it to 90, because
Yeah.
and I think it's gonna go into the 90s statistically as well as our generation gets older because of the advancement in health, etc., etc. And as I say, I definitely see myself working until 70. I probably have to, as David says, right? Let's think about pension. I probably have to work until I'm 70 or longer anyway. But I wonder if there's a post midlife before end of life, if there's another period. Talking to Chip Conley recently, is there maybe an elderly life, right? Where we're the modern elders, right? Where we, from 70 onwards, maybe there's a phase where we have all this knowledge, we're still very active, but we're out of midlife. We don't worry about the sports car and everything else anymore. We're in a different bucket. We're still contributing. We're still part of the community, and we're way away from the end of life, and we're still contributing. We're still part of something. I don't know.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts on that, Volker. One is,
Yeah.
I can't speak for the UK, but in the US, we park in a driveway and we drive in a parkway.
Right.
So why do I say that? Like, what do I mean by that? And that is just the magic and the confusion of the words that are in our vocabulary, in the English
Yeah.
vocabulary. And again, I don't know to what extent that applies in the UK. So my point is, there are all these little quirky words, let's call it linguistics, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it, that are not meant to be literal. Again, a parkway in the US is where we're driving,
Yeah.
and then a driveway is where we're parking.
Yeah.
Right? So in the context of this conversation, midlife is not meant to be the midpoint of life.
Yeah.
So I prefer to think of it in terms of those three stages. I'll tell you why I don't like the stage called elderly, and that is because
Yeah.
elderly does have a connotation that I just don't think can change. And I think that connotation, that perception, my background is marketing, so branding, perception is everything, right? I
Yeah.
think the perception of elderly is, someone leaned over, maybe they're in a cane, they're using a walker, that kind of thing. I saw my parents go through that in their end of life season, which,
Yeah.
someone else might call elderly, but I knew it was their end of life season. They were in a decline.
Yeah.
And I was never in denial of reality. I could never predict when their end was going to come, and, just enjoyed every moment that I had with them and tried to, make it as good for them as possibly could. But during that season, I knew that it was an end of life season because I actually watched them flourishing up until about a specific point,
Right.
And frankly, it was their 70s and 80s. They were doing great. And, I can give you more detail than you need to know. But
Yeah.
somewhere around turning 90 for them, I'm not saying that happens because my father-in-law is going to be 96 soon. He's doing great. But for them, that was their beginning of the end of life season for them.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of elderly because I just think brand-wise, perception-wise,
Yeah.
it's not a pretty picture.
Okay. No, I mean it's as you say, it's maybe it's semantics, but no, but I like that. David, what do you think?
I mean, oh well, I could sit here and talk about language and linguistics all day if I can actually say
Don't
it.
ask the German.
But I mean, because it's almost like, well, the phrase elder and elder to me sort of gives like gravitas and wisdom, but whereas elderly, as you say, that has a slightly sort of negative connotation. I mean, it's this is sort of more because I know that we're getting towards the end of the episode. There was another one of your episodes that I was listening to with Jen Hardy, and she had some like amazing quotes. And it was sort of you were talking about how she'd like monetized her YouTube channel, and you were talking about how sort of it's almost like once you get past 50, society, it's almost like all these people don't matter. It's almost like any adverts aimed at that age group will be for medication or, for a certain, like, an elderly lifestyle, I guess. And sort of I've got a couple of quotes written down because I just thought she was amazing, but she said it's about time that our culture starts recognizing us as equally important. And she said there's so many other cultures that honor people as they age, whereas, in Western society, it is almost seen as, right, yeah, you're being put out to pasture. And like the final quote was, "We've got a lot of great things to say and we've got decades left." And I was like, wow, that, yeah. And sorry, and just this isn't a criticism of you at all. Like, one of the amazing things that we find is that 40% of our listenership is actually female. So I think there's a lot of women that listen to us because men don't talk. So it's almost like, oh, well, here are some men that are talking and talking about things that my husband doesn't talk to. So perhaps I'll listen to try and understand what's going on. But sorry, getting back to my point, I mean, and Volker mentioned that we interviewed Chip Connolly quite recently, and a lot of the discussion was about, well, I guess almost putting the spotlight back on people that have got this experience. And I mean, one of the things that we talked about is, particularly in the workspace and, well, in marketing, because I work in marketing, but the platforms changed. So, there's a new social media platform, there's new this, there's new that. And it's like, well, actually, you need someone with experience that's worked through several recessions, etc. But, you need that experience to guide the latest modern tools. And I mean, I guess well, I don't know whether I'm just making this a bit of a rant or turning it into a question, but yeah, I do think that as a society, we're so obsessed with finding the new, shiny, efficient thing that we do almost ignore what's become before, whether that is, sort of, I mean, like I've basically got back to writing, as in like, I'll physically, got a digital.
You just went quiet, David.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I've got,
no,
it's a digital notepad, but I find that I'm a lot more creative physically writing than typing. And, and it is, we sort of humans just seem so obsessed with finding the thing that's easier rather than, oh yeah, just, harnessing what we already have, being grateful for what we already have, including human experience. I don't know if you can make any sense of that.
So let me share. I know we're getting close to wrapping here. So let me share a final thought or comment. And that is that, and I wanted to save this because I wanted to cover what we've covered for context. Fulfillment is the second most powerful emotion in our humanity, second only to the emotion of love. And love is something that a lot of men struggle with. And so what I'm suggesting is, and this is not restricted to men, but on your podcast, although you've just shared that 40% of your listeners are women, which is fabulous. I love that.
Yeah, it's great.
If we can embrace fulfillment, knowing that it's the second most powerful emotion, second only to the emotion of love, then we can apply that in our life again across these 5 pillars. We can even apply that. I've taken it into a leadership framework. We can apply that into organizations, and it can just give us a better way to lead our lives in a way that just gives us more fulfillment. And that, I believe, can also equip us to love better, to love more, and to be conscious about that. So I just wanted to kind of, leave with that thought, to put a little bit of icing on the cake, so to speak, pick your metaphor. But yeah, just wanted to share that.
Well, as a big Beatles fan, all you need is love. That's all I'll say.
That's great. So, Bernie, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. Unfortunately, I mean, I said it at the beginning before we went live, right? It's kind of like, once we get going, we stop, unfortunately. I always think we need to have, longer episodes or whatever, but very thought-provoking podcast. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, the love, the fulfillment ideas and ideas of midlife. If people want to find out more about you, where can they find your podcast, your website? How do they best get in touch?
Sure. Thank you. Website is midlifefulfilled.com. Everything's there. The podcast is there. My blog is there. Everything is there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm Bernie Borges on both of them. Borges is Borges. So happy to connect with anyone. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, include a little note saying you heard me on the Man Up, Man Down podcast. That would be awesome. And thank you guys. Thank you, David. Thank you, Volker, for having me on the Man Up, Man Down podcast. I look forward to having a conversation with you on my Midlife Fulfilled podcast very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Feel free to reach out to Volker or David via our website, www.manupdown.com or podcast@manupdown.com, with any feedback or to let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Hear you again soon.